Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to start our final session. And we're going to start off by announcing our winner of the Open Innovation Challenge. So all of the Open Innovation Challengers, if I can get you to go ahead and come on up here. We have a number of, oh yes, please, yes, applaud for our challengers, absolutely. Absolutely. So for the inaugural Open Innovation Challenge, in the spirit of eating your own dog food, we designed and 3D printed these custom trophies to recognize, yes, these were designed by Zach Zidek. Is Zach here somewhere? He's around, I know. And so carefully crafted in our offices, and so we were inspired by this event. We thought, a unique event needs a unique trophy, and so that's where this came from. So we were very excited with the Open Innovation Challenge, and the feedback has been incredible. A lot of it having to do with Stubbs' last-minute kind of introduction as an assistant. But, we were blown away. There were so many unexpected pieces, even as we got to meet each of these challengers and get to know them and learn more about their projects. It seemed that their project was just like the surface. There were so many other ideas that lived underneath. And so we have learned so much through that process, and we look forward to learning more from these folks in the future. But there does, in the spirit of the challenge, there does have to be a winner. And this year, it was decisive, actually. We were very excited about that. And so this year, the inaugural Open Innovation Challenge winner is Ann Clements. Congratulations.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's a lot of work coming now.
There you go. Very good. And with that said, we have also additional smaller trophies for each of our challengers as well. Another round of applause for all of the challengers. There you go. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
So with that said, we're kind of leading into our last session today, the Open Innovation Challenge, and we're very excited because what we wanted to do is kind of take an opportunity to bring in some new perspectives that inform us. And I'm always reminded in these kind of discussions around innovation about the ways that technology solves problems for us that we sometimes didn't even know that we had. There's a product on the market now called the selfie stick. Has anybody seen this thing? Right? Maybe even own one. The idea is it's a stick that you put your phone at the end of, and so you can take a selfie of yourself, but from a much wider angle. And until that device came along, I had no idea that my arm just wasn't long enough. Right? It solved that problem for me. But that's kind of the way we get to think creatively about some of these solutions. And so that's where I'd like to introduce our panelists today. First, we have Katie Vale. She's the Director of Digital Learning at Harvard. And she plays a key role in some of the most influential educational technologies over the last few decades. Please, Katie, come on up. We also have Tom Cavanagh. He's the Associate Vice President of Distributed Learning at the University of Central Florida. He's also an award-winning instructional designer himself and program manager, faculty member, and an administrator. So please welcome Tom. And last, we have Peter Doolittle, and I'm very excited to have Peter here. I just had the opportunity to see him keynote at ELI in Anaheim last month. He's the Executive Director for the Center of Instructional Development and Educational Research at Virginia Tech. He has 25 years of experience in teaching and undergraduate and graduate students in both traditional and blended formats, so welcome, Peter. So in terms of format, we have Alien Invasion. Fantastic. All right. Is that me? Do I need to stand somewhere different? So in terms of format, I've developed a series of questions, but in reality, I would rather have questions coming from you all. And this is all intended to be very conversational, but realizing you probably didn't prepare questions, and I did, I can kind of begin to kick that off. But as we begin to discuss, if you have a question, who's running the mic, by the way? Somebody, Megan's volunteered, thank you. Just put your hand in the air, and we'll get the microphone over to you so you can ask your question. All right. These are deeper than they look. All right. The first question deals with looking forward into the future, right? And this is a bit of a softball question, but it's a nice warm-up. So as you begin to look forward into the future, what are these emerging trends that you think we should be looking forward to or beginning to identify now because we think that they'll have some kind of impact in the future? And along those lines, how did you kind of begin to recognize those trends? What were the hallmarks that you look forward to that said, you know what, this is something that may have legs? Would you like to start?
Sure, I can start. So I'm very fortunate in that I am running a pre-college seminar out of my home in the form of my 15-year-old and 11-year-old children. And what I see them doing in just a regular sort of public high school in Massachusetts is so different from what I am seeing our undergraduates at Harvard doing that I'm worried for how much change is going to happen in a relatively short period of time if my kids are not going to go to college and not be sort of disappointed with the way that they are being taught. So, my kids' schools use, for example, Google Docs. So my kids never have to print out papers or handwrite papers. Everything's submitted electronically, graded very quickly electronically, and so on. Also, my kids are very used to looking up the information that they need when they need it. So they can find, video clips of how to do anything from, build, at Raspberry Pi robots to baking fancy cupcakes to anything that they want is already at their fingertips. So they're really used to accessing what they want when they want to use it. And then when, in some cases we'll go to school and then they find they're not allowed to use their device at school, which is another thing that I think they will see once they get to college. But really just sort of that, they are the quote unquote digital natives, and our faculty are not quite ready to deal with them just yet.
I'll go next, I guess. A trend that I've been sort of observing for a little while, and it's one that I've heard mentioned here throughout the day, is this concept of personalized learning. And you can define that a lot of different ways, but Kyle, sort of your second part of the question, which is how did you start thinking about that? I've seen a lot of initiatives across the country, and we're doing a number at my institution, such as adaptive learning and competency-based learning and learning analytics, and looking for ways to personalize interventions for students to try and help them retain. And all of these things are personalized initiatives, individualized initiatives. We're doing things with our learning management system. I believe you guys are contemplating Canvas. We've been using Canvas for a little while. And we've been, I think, among the most aggressive institutions in leveraging LTI interoperability integrations to personalize the experience for both faculty and students so that the Canvas that they are using might be actually very different than the Canvas that the student sitting next to them might be using based upon the kinds of integrations that they're using. And I don't think this is going away anytime soon. I think this concept of personalization is only going to become more pronounced. It's sort of the old differentiated instruction idea, but what technology has done is allowed us to do it at a scale that we've never been able to do it before. So that's a trend that I see.
What I was thinking about was personalization. And
great minds.
It's like, oh man. And so in the last 30 seconds, I've come up with another one. I think one of the things that we're seeing is the space for students to create authentic artifacts. And what I mean by that is there's no reason why they can't go out in the world and create things that people use. I'm fading here. So oftentimes the activities and what we ask them to do in class are artificial. But more and more, we're gaining the technology and in some ways the trust in our students. To let them go beyond our classroom, to engage in authentic activities, to create authentic artifacts. And oftentimes they're creating things that the industry pick up and use. And so I think part of the personalization is giving them freedom of space and the freedom to move. And we heard some of that today in this awesome innovation challenge, where we're allowing them to create their own assignments and create their own content. And as a result of that, they go off, and students do awesome things when you give them space. They go off as part of their authentic assessment, and they come back with something that was a real world problem that somebody else had, and they solved it. And so I think we are giving them the space to be truly awesome.
That's a really great point, Peter. I've always been thought about students like the toys from Toy Story, that they kind of come to life when you're not watching, and it's very interesting to see it as you've kind of portrayed it there. And actually, let me kind of throw this next one to you, and also as an opportunity to take Tom's answer before he gives it. So Katie mentioned the need for faculty preparedness around some of these ideas. And I know this is one of your particular areas of activity. And so could you talk a little bit about how do we begin to formulate these programs, and what are you seeing as successful approaches to thinking about those types of topics?
As far as giving people space? Or
no, in
about
terms of the faculty development and preparing them for these types of teaching.
Yeah, we live in a weird space where students aren't taught to learn and faculty typically aren't taught to teach. And so they come in because they're educated as biologists and philosophers and things like that, and they come with an understanding based on their practice, having been in higher education for 20 some odd years. And one of the things that we need to do is let them know it's okay to learn new things in the educational environment. And we need to make classes public spaces. I've been teaching for, I guess, about 25 years, and I've had somebody come into my class to watch me teach 3 times. And I'm thinking, why isn't somebody in there all the time? Because as my job now, I go into spaces all the time, and I'm learning things, watching other people doing it. Why aren't we doing that? And so, not just engineers watching engineers, but engineers watching philosophers, and philosophers watching Spanish teachers. We need to open that up so that that's just something that we do all the time, and that it's enjoyable, it's fun, we get to share it socially, and it's not, oh my gosh, they're going to criticize me. Stay out of my class. Or let me know when you come so I can construct a Disney lesson, where all the students are wondering, why are we doing all this cool stuff today? Because we don't do it normally. So I think part of it is making it okay to learn new things around teaching and learning, and as we heard this morning, to risk. You know, one of the things, if you're teaching philosophy or education or psychology, if you risk and it doesn't work, no one dies. You know, it's like, wow, that lesson didn't really work very well. Let's try that again. And so we need to be open to that in the same way that we want to be open for us.
So
Tom, if you'd like to-
the question is more about faculty development. And so we put a big, at least in my world where I'm responsible for online learning, we put a big emphasis on faculty development. But I'll be honest, I fear a little bit more widely, not at Penn State, because I know your program's actually quite good, but at other institutions that might be sort of new to online learning, that we're kind of outrunning our supply lines a little bit, where it's real easy to give somebody an LMS shell and say, go teach online, without giving them the preparation on how to make most effective use and really leverage the affordances of that particular medium, as opposed to just saying, do what you did over here, but do it on there. And that's how you end up with just, videos and a quiz that's from the publisher. A little more broadly, though, I do think that, that technology in general is, well, faculty can, let me put it this way. Faculty are very busy, and we respect that. I respect that. And I'm very fortunate in that I get to go to conferences like this, or I get to go to EDUCAUSE, or I get to go to the Online Learning Consortium, or all these other places where we talk about disruption and innovation and technology. And then I come back to campus, and there's probably a dozen faculty that I can talk to that care what I'm talking about. The rest, because they're busy, and I get it, and they're being evaluated for promotion and tenure on primary research in their discipline, don't really have the time to care about competency-based learning or adaptive learning, except for the few that are always engaged, that are always willing to try something new. And so in conversations that I've had with philanthropic organizations or with publishers, when they say, well, what can we do to help? Like, well, not to sound too mercenary, but you've got a big checkbook. And I'm not asking for a lot of money. If you could give me a few course releases, I can buy out some time, and then suddenly you're freeing up space in faculty's busy lives to try some of these innovations and perhaps fail, and that's okay. But without creating that sort of space, it's really hard to move the needle on some of these things. And I think that's where some of these philanthropic organizations don't quite get it, or the publishers don't quite get it, because they haven't bothered to actually talk to faculty about what your day is like, with teaching and service and scholarship, and I got 4 preps this semester, and you want me to learn what system? No, I'm busy. So I think that perhaps finding a way to free up resources to allow that sort of innovation to happen is a critical prerequisite.
I think also, we use technology as sort of a sneaky backdoor into talking about pedagogy a lot of the time. So I'm privileged to work with a really excellent teaching and learning center at Harvard. The staff of the Derek Bach Center for Teaching and Learning truly are exceptional people. They're the nicest people. They're experts in their field, and faculty very rarely go to them, unfortunately. And so when I talk to my colleagues at the Teaching and Learning Center, they're actually jealous of my team because we're the ones who are actually able to talk to faculty sort of about teaching, about learning objectives, about exercises, about class activities, because we're doing it in the guise of, oh, hey, we're moving to Canvas, so let's move your course website, and while we're here, let's talk about your learning objectives, let's talk about your outcomes. Have you thought about how you might do this particular exercise, and hey, here is an application that might help you. So we're actually able to have more substantive discussions with them because it's the technology than our teaching and learning center is. So I tend to refer to this as sort of sneaking the pedagogical vegetables onto their plate, while they have to do this tech thing anyway, and we just happen to be there and introducing some of these same ideas that our colleagues at the teaching center would.
Very good. That's an excellent point. I like that idea of technology being the sneaky backdoor to pedagogy. That's an excellent point. We have a question right over here.
I'd like to ask the panel to consider a financial question. The universities are feeling the pressure of creative destruction. We're really seeing a lot of pressure. We see the student loan crisis, we see the cost crisis, all these things. I'm wondering what the panel thinks about how learning and teaching with technology is going to contribute to lower costs, greater productivity. I'm not talking about putting more eggs in the same box, but what is it that's going to help? Because this is going to be a very strong public, legislative, and university imperative.
I'll start. One of the great promises of technology, and I'll talk specifically about online learning, is that it can break that iron triangle that everybody has talked about of cost, access, and affordability, because you're not using the same paradigm anymore. So, for example, let's take adaptive learning. Adaptive learning is still relatively new in its kind of latest hype, and I personally think that there's a there with adaptive learning. And you could potentially teach a significant number of students in a single class, and each of them have their own unique, individualized experience that's tailored for them, their weaknesses, their strengths, and have it be really meaningful to them. I don't know if we're quite there yet, but I think we're on our way to something like that. And if we could approach that, you could potentially reduce costs for students, and I'm not talking about fewer faculty necessarily, but maybe redirecting faculty to other activities or more sort of collaborative research or whatever the case might be. Because our experience so far with adaptive learning, and granted it's been a couple semester pilot, has been that the faculty don't spend any less time. They're just spending their time differently with the students, perhaps a little more effectively. So I do think that technology can address these issues by changing the process. Now, I'll quote my boss. because I think that this is true. Simply adding technology without changing the process is only going to add cost and frustration to everybody. So I do think if you're going to add technology, you have to fundamentally change the business process surrounding its usage. It's like why all these, let's buy iPads for all the students kind of don't work. So they all have iPads. Woo! You know, it hasn't fundamentally changed their learning process.
Yeah, and I think as someone who has friends and relatives who teach both in the Wisconsin and Maine systems, I'm really worried about some of this cost cutting that's going on right now. And you know, even in my current position, so my big project right now is I'm architecting Harvard's very first ever blended degree program. So it's a Master's of Public Health degree, and it's, you know, students will be on campus part-time and online sort of the rest of the time. And so our people in our finance team keep coming over and saying, oh, so we can just repurpose those MOOCs, right? And then they'll just watch the MOOCs and we're going to give them credit. That's how it's going to work, right? And so I spend a lot of my time really trying to educate them about, you know, what education really is and what is going to lead to student engagement and, you know, positive outcomes, and saying that no, you know, MOOCs have done a lot of wonderful things for people who have great self-regulated learning, but a MOOC is not the same thing as an engaged educational experience. It can be. I think there are some, you know, there are some MOOCs that are sort of leading toward that, but that's not really the same thing as the, you know, the type of blended degree program, you know, that we're trying to do. So there are a lot of finance people who I think see that MOOC model of that one-to-many that harkens back to sort of the old factory model of education that John Dewey was, you know, sort of railing against. So I think it's up to us to kind of try to educate the finance people about what we're really trying to do here, that we're not just trying to broadcast out to people. We're trying to really have, you know, meaningful educational relationships with our students and meet them where they are and get them to the outcomes that we've already designed.
I think it's risky to lay on technology the idea that it's going to save us money. I think if we're really after student learning, we've got to be real careful that we don't take the approach of now with technology, one instructor, especially if you videotape him or her, suddenly can go out to everyone. You know, one of the things that I've seen in the last several years with Khan Academy and some of these things, that somehow while we were thinking about lectures as not the best pedagogy, if you videotape them and digitize them, suddenly they're awesome. Actually, they're not. They're just as bad as they were. In some sense, I would say they're worse because you've lost the personal touch. I mean, there's no real presence there. So you've got to be careful with bringing technology in to solve that problem, because there are times when learning needs to be high touch. And as you mentioned, and I think this is really important, as we create environments that are more and more anonymous, they require a certain skill set within the student to be successful. And that skill set tends to be the skill set our better students already have. Good time management, good self-regulation, good learning. What do we do for the other 80%? And how we want to make sure that in stack them deep and teach them cheap in large classes, we're not losing the other 80%.
Yeah, one of my colleagues, Richard Light, has done extensive studies on student satisfaction with their education. And his top finding is basically student satisfaction is largely tied with the number of faculty who they came to know sort of well enough to, you know, give them a recommendation or work in their lab or something like that. That was the number one factor, was how much did the faculty get to know the students that they were teaching. And as long as the students had met or become acquainted with one faculty member per year that they were studying, they tended to score the highest on their student satisfaction ratings. This has also been echoed in some of the research that Tom's colleagues have done in terms of looking at, you know, students in online settings. The two factors that they've identified have been whether the instruction has been clear and whether the feedback has been sort of prompt and in-depth enough that the student who was studying online felt like they were really a student at UCF, feeling like they were really, that someone really was caring about them and their progress through their courses.
Kyle, did you have a question?
Yes. Again, thanks for coming. Two priorities expressed by our president here at Penn State and our president of the country have to do with reducing cost of higher education and time to degree completion. So I know personalization, I'm a fan. I think that's one way to do that. But also, I think personalization needs to extend to allowing people, so 41% of people don't start and finish. Only 41% of people finish at the same university they start at. And then they come to another university and we only let them bring in this many credits. And there's a lot of redundancy there. And a lot of people know and can do things that are college credit worthy, but we don't really allow them to test out of that or submit portfolios. So do you think that at any of our institutions, any of the ones you represent or ours, how long do you think it might be before we're willing to at least waive, if we don't give somebody credit, if they take a MOOC and they actually do learn the content, and then they sit for a proctored exam or something, I mean, why aren't we going to go ahead and allow that? And will our institutions get there? And if so, maybe how long might that take?
In Florida, there's a law now. There's always a law in Florida that we're all trying to figure out what the heck this means. That during the MOOC hype of whatever it was 2 years ago, year of the MOOC, our legislature decided that they were going to write into statute that the 12 universities in the state university system are going to have to accept credits for MOOCs. But they didn't really define what that meant or how we're going to do it, so there's a multi-institution commission now looking at, so how would we do this? And I've been involved just peripherally in some of those conversations. And it's a mess, you know, because nobody wants to grant credit, except for maybe FIU. They're experimenting a little, but I think it's because they want to offer MOOCs for credit. Our institution has been, frankly, for as innovative and entrepreneurial as I think UCF is, has been really conservative in this area about accepting credits for like credit by exam or portfolio submissions, and we've been really reluctant to do that sort of thing. So to answer the second part of your question, I don't know how long it's going to take for a school like ours. It may be sooner than we want because of legislative mandate.
Well, I'm not for credit for MOOCs, but I'm not for credit for MOOCs, but for credit for demonstrated knowledge and skills and so on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, I guess first thing that jumps to my mind is from a university standpoint, if I'm giving you credit for something that you didn't do here at Tech, I don't get your money, which then means I'm shorter. So,
Right.
So it'd be kind of hard to say, hey, that's great, I'm going to give you credit for this whole course, but you're going to have to pay me the entire fee for that whole course. And I have trouble seeing a large institution agreeing to that. So, you know, to me, part of this is I think there's looseness in a college education. I think if we stepped back, because we're historical institutions, and so the whole idea of you need this many courses and credits for a major and this many courses and credits for gen ed, and then you have these many. If we stepped back and said, now really what is a major in philosophy? What is a major in engineering? And we pulled everybody together and we tightened up the curriculum, we could shorten it. Because we do have redundancy, we do have things that are being taught that could be learned elsewhere. And if we work with industry, finding out what do they really need them to know upon exit versus once they get there. So I think there's ways of tightening up our curriculum, but we've been so distributed, it's fairly disjointed because one group isn't talking to the other group. So if we could get together as a team and sort that out, I think we could shorten time to degree.
Yeah, I'm a freshman advisor and also was at MIT before Harvard, and one of the refrains I always hear from my students is they wish they could have their senior year of high school back because they wouldn't have killed themselves in so many AP courses, because once they got there they realized they didn't actually get any credit for this. They thought that by taking 5 APs they were going to be able to shorten their time in college and save money for their families, and they found out that they maybe got advanced placement out of one course, but it still didn't get them out of a requirement, or the school still made them take the standard freshman level math courses, and so we haven't even figured this out at the AP level yet. So I think it's going to be a while before we even figure this out for other forms of competency-based learning.
Thank you. I suspect that although you're right, we would lose some money, the number of students that we would increase the number of students. I think we'll see more people for shorter periods of time.
It's a greater throughput that way.
Yeah, and we'll create some revenue from the assessments.
I doubt your students would have gotten into MIT or Harvard. If
Well,
they
that's the
hadn't taken
thing.
it.
Exactly.
So can I ask a question? This is a question about our students, so flipping the equation a little bit. I've been very interested in digging into the idea of what is it about our students that are preventing them from learning in our classrooms. And I'd like to know if you each might have an example or an idea of something that you see that is inhibiting student learning. And then adding on to that, since you're all in innovation types of centers, what are the things that we might think about doing to overcome that particular inhibitor or prevention piece? Tom, I won't pick on you first, but I do know you, so.
Okay, thanks, Larry. Well, one idea, and it's not an area that I'm particularly expert at, but it's something that we've talked about recently within our wider information technology group, is the whole trend towards bring your own device. And I know that in the classroom, students are sitting there on their phones and on their laptops, ostensibly taking notes, right? But we know they're on Facebook or Twitter or other things, especially if it's a large lecture hall and you can sort of be anonymous in the crowd. But there are faculty who have co-opted that. I'm thinking of one of our psychology faculty. And he has everybody bring their cell phones. And if the cell phone rings in class, he runs up there and he answers it. And he'll arrange for everybody to have somebody call them on their cell phone in the middle of class on one particular day. He says, let's get it all over with right now. But it's a psychology class, and he actually works it into his curriculum. So it's not about let's keep technology out, which I think isn't, to answer your question, inhibiting learning when it's being a distraction. But how do we co-opt it and incorporate it into the learning environment so that it actually provides more engagement and can be used as a tool for the learning as opposed to just fighting this losing battle against keeping back the tide of students bringing technology into the classroom. And how do we make the spaces more receptive to a student and faculty, frankly, bringing in their own devices and being able to connect them together or wirelessly project onto this monitor on the wall so that you could have groups working together or things like that. Encourage it, but encourage it in productive ways.
Good question. I'm slow to put a lot of blame on students, but I think students bring in a school mentality. This is kind of the school mindset. I'm going to come in, I'm going to sit down, and you're going to do stuff to me, and I'm going to, write it down, and then you're going to ask it for me later. And oftentimes, like at a place like Tech, and I guess it's similar to your institutions, that's how you get into school. I mean, you're good at that. And you get good grades, and we come to college, and I'm going to be good at that. And if we're going to shift models, which I think we are, then as students, the very first day, we need to let them know this is a different place. This is the new mindset we need from you, and we, as a faculty, need to take that mindset and run with it. And so if we're looking at active learning with whatever that means, and from my case as a cognitive scientist, it means students are processing cognitively, socially, behaviorally, affectively. They're engaged. A lot of the things like the whole thing this morning, getting them engaged and recognizing that that's how all your classes are going to be. Now, in some sense, this is the University of Lake Wobegon, but I'm up for that. I'm up for the challenge of how do we get people, when they step on campus, this is going to be different. And this is what we need from you. Oftentimes they give us what it is we've created, that space for them to give that back to us. So if they're sitting in our classes playing around with Facebook, my thought is that class needs to be restructured in such a way that they are used to coming in and being active. And so I think there's two sides to that.
Peter, are you also implying, though, that perhaps we need to be helping our students learn how to learn?
Without a doubt.
In these new spaces?
Yes, because most of our students come to us with very poor learning skills. Even some of the good ones don't understand how to learn in certain areas and within different domains. Learning how to speak another language is not the same thing as learning in philosophy, which is not the same thing as learning engineering. So this idea that because I have certain skills I can learn in any area isn't true. And for our students who are in the middle or the bottom, oftentimes they're in the middle or the bottom because they have poor strategies relative to the teaching learning process. So I think that should be mandatory.
Good, thank you.
From kindergarten on.
Katie?
So back when I was at MIT, we undertook a pretty ambitious project to rethink the freshman physics curriculum. Because we were finding that there were a sizable number of students who, even though they were generally valedictorians or salutatorians, were actually not passing freshman physics. And so we went from having a huge lecture, so it used to be sort of a 300-person lecture, and we adopted a studio model. This was a project that was called TEAL, where the students were in a room about half the size of the one you're in, and they were sitting at tables much like the ones you're at. On some days they would have computers where they were doing simulations, say, of electromagnetism, or they might have a version of a Tesla coil on their each table so that they could actually work on some of these experiments. But the thing that the students objected to the most is we actually made them do this in a team-based way. So we actually did a pre-test, and based on the results of a pre-test, we grouped students together as sort of high, medium, and low scorers in groups of 3, and we made them tutor each other through the entire semester. And MIT still does attract students who are really rather sort of individualistic overachievers. These are the kids who really have done really well sort of in high school, and they were not used to working with people, and they really rebelled about that. But we did this very purposefully because we were starting to hear from employers that MIT, you're sending us super smart kids and nobody wants to work with them because they just don't know how to work in teams. And so we started with this physics course as a way to start mandating team skills, and we actually had trained our TAs on how to mediate in these groups whenever issues would arise. So for instance, one of the early lessons we learned was not to, in our groups of 3, not to have 2 men and 1 woman in a group because the women tended to be sort of shouted down or disagreed with, or would sort of clam up and not make her input known. But when we did this, as I said, it was very unpopular, and we had to end up waiting for the cohort that had taken physics the old way to graduate, because they were constantly telling all the new kids of like, oh, haha, you have to do the TEAL thing. We got to do it the normal way, where we just all showed up in the 300-person lecture and we all just kind of, were on an individual basis. We'd wait for those kids to get out of there and graduate until the way we taught physics became the normal way that we teach physics, at MIT. And that's sort of still how it goes, and we've expanded the team-based approaches and project-based learning throughout the freshman year so that they're not arriving at MIT and just doing large lecture courses sort of on their own.
We have a question in the back.
Thank you very much. And I'm not quite sure I know how to put this into words or whether it's going to come out sounding completely foolish. But in the idea of innovation, I work with undergraduate students, as many do, doing undergraduate research. We're going to have, I don't know when the Engaged Scholarship Symposium is, that's coming up, so that's sort of along the lines of these sort of things. But I wonder, as we're talking about these things and discussing how to be better teachers and discussing how students need to be better learners, why we don't have more opportunities of something like this. And I realize whether they would come or whether the faculty would come to things like this, obviously we're all here. Why we don't have something where we have half faculty, half students, where the students would be a part of this conversation. They'd be at a meeting like this. Now, again, I'm not sure they would come. But having them as, they should be half of this conversation because they're adults. Many of them are, but that is going to be an important part of how we form our ideas and how we do the things that we do. And I almost feel like we've only got half the picture here. As we're trying to attempt to do these things. And so I wonder if there are those things going on already where we do have rich conversations with a wide range of students and not just those that happen to show up. I know that I struggle getting, of course, the ones that show up are the very active, sometimes the best students. And so how you get everyone there is a challenge. But I think if we really want to innovate and move forward, we need to have both sides there for that conversation. So I'd be curious if any of you have experimented with some of that or have ideas or have seen that work well in other places.
Sure, we have a decent number of students that are brought in on various projects, whether it's the honors program or we're reworking our general education. We've had groups of students come in to talk to us. I think you're exactly right. I think not having students is the old model of education, something that's done to students, rather than it being something that comes from students, that they're really active in that whole process. So I do think we need to get them more into the conversation in more meaningful ways. And if we're headed towards personalization, then I think that's definitely going to have to happen.
I'm very fortunate that I have a number of students that actually work in my unit, and they're a great source of feedback and sort of reality as we're developing things and supporting faculty. Something that I've done, not at the scale I think that you're suggesting, but something that I've done that I think has been well received. We have a new faculty orientation every year, and then we have a similar sort of gathering like this twice a year, our summer conference and winter conference. It's run by our Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning, so it isn't necessarily technology focused, although technology can be part of it. And several times I've brought a group of students and done a panel just like this for the faculty. And it's because it's me, it's mostly oriented around online learning, but it hasn't always been. Sometimes it's been focused more on accessibility. So I brought in students who are blind or have other handicaps and have them talk to faculty about what the reality of their experience is. And whether it's new faculty or experienced faculty who are going through the summer or winter conference, you can't argue with the student experience. So in just having a conversation with faculty, I've heard all kinds of reasons, and they may be legitimate, about why something doesn't work or why students should do something. But when you get the students up front and they explain, hey, the course didn't work because this and this, or I always ask, what advice would you give faculty, or what makes a good online course, or what's a bad online course? And I think hearing it directly from students carries an enormous amount of credibility, more so than me saying the exact same thing to those exact same faculty, because it's their authentic experience of what was good and maybe what was not so good.
I happen to have, I know everyone sits still, but I have a student back here, and he's asked to talk.
Yeah, since like the question was asked about if like students were having part of this conversation and me sitting in here, like some of the reasons why like I don't do well is because a teacher would have like a PowerPoint and all the slides are from the book. So there's no point of even paying attention in class if he's just retorting from the book. I mean, sometimes it's nice having the PowerPoints up online and like so I can look at them later, but it's more important not to have things straight from the book. It's like if I'm going to be taking notes, I would prefer to have like something like him writing on the board or on the screen of a separate problem that I can't find, like something that one of my teachers has done in the past was he would ask us what kind of numbers we want to do for a math course. Like, we're doing this set of thing, give me numbers. And we just randomly set them out, so then we are actually working out our own problem. And if it doesn't work out, then that's the reason why. And it's also like when sometimes they give us the answers to homeworks, they just put down like their like very skimmed version. And I'm like, how am I supposed to do this when you want us to do every single step? So it's kind of hard when the books and the teachers do not provide an entire breakdown of it. And most of it doesn't even have to do with technology. I mean, when they start introducing technology, it doesn't really become helpful. The only time that it has been helpful is when we've had large lecture halls and then we go into a separate class, which is recitation that is smaller. Those are the ones I've actually had the best grades because I've actually been like working with other people and talking to TAs in a smaller setting. For technology-wise, like I've had online courses where I've learned a lot, and it was just because they had like videos and all this other help, and it wasn't just like, oh, here's a book, here's questions, and there you go. So that's my comments on this.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, and if I could add something to the previous conversation that I'm going to interpret as student voice, one of the things we're piloting this time, Cody's helping me out here. There we go. Can you hear me anyway? Yeah. Okay. One of the things that we're trying is, for courses that meet once a week or twice a week when we're piloting this, that at the end of every class, the students do a daily course evaluation. Typically, we wait until the course is over and then we give them a course evaluation. But after every class, they have to answer 5 very quick questions. How was the introduction? How was I stimulated to process cognitively, socially? How was inclusion? Overall, how was it? What's still fuzzy? What really resonated with you? And then general comments. What we're finding is students really appreciate the fact that they have a voice into the class. In the third class in, they're providing feedback to faculty that can then take that and start to rework the class as it's in process. So they know if I covered something and it didn't quite make sense, they can restart the next class by talking about those things. So we're working with faculty to make sure they communicate with their students, that they have received the feedback and that they're using that to inform the class. But it's one of the ways of taking student voice and making it an integral part of the class.
We have a question in the back there.
Thank you. During the panel discussion, the example came up about a student learning a foreign language as their major. And recently, Microsoft just released a technology that does real-time language translation on Skype. And so my question is, how do we make sure that the majors that students are embarking upon is aligned with the future career opportunities that they are? Because I envision, a few years from now, you'd have a Bluetooth headset, and the need to learn a new language may not be as relevant given the advancement of these technologies.
Okay, I'll jump.
Okay.
Two things. One, learning a language is more than learning the word. Part of learning a new language is learning to think in the language, because different cultures think differently based on the languages that they have. So a mere translation isn't necessarily going to give you the full benefit of learning that particular language. So it can be translated and it can come out of your device and not necessarily communicate in a true sense what it was that you wanted to do. The flip side of that is I do think that we need our students to learn the technologies that are out there that allow us to interact in the world more effectively. So recently I was in Brazil and I was in a marketplace trying to buy certain things, and I thought, well, my Spanish will help. Well, they speak Portuguese, so it didn't help at all. And so there are lots of pointing going on and numbers, and then that worked. A translator would have helped me to a certain extent, but not to the same extent of being able to think in that language and understanding the world from a different perspective based on the language itself. So I would agree with you, but I think language is more than that.
Yeah, and I think just to extrapolate a little bit from that, I think the whole idea of the liberal arts education is a little bit under fire right now. There are certain factions who think that education should be more sort of job skills and lead directly to a trade of some kind. Whereas I think those of us who maybe come from a more liberal arts tradition realize that educating the whole person and preparing someone for civic engagement is a worthwhile pursuit. But I can't help thinking that there has to be some kind of happy medium or some kind of middle ground that that it's okay to major in French or in Russian, but I think at the same time while you're in college or at university, you're doing something that's going to help you start scaffolding for some kind of a career. So whether that means you're amassing a portfolio of projects you've worked on, you have some kind of work-study job that shows that you're dependable or that you have good writing skills or things like that. I think that's possibly a middle ground as opposed to some of the things that certain foundations are funding to just try to make college be a way to be employed in a call center after graduation.
And if I could kind of just maybe project a little bit beyond, I think, the intent of the question, which is sort of what is the value proposition of a university education in an era when the entire sum total of human knowledge is available on your smartphone? And I've heard it said that the role of a university is partly curation. So how do you make sense of this vast overload of knowledge that's at your disposal and make the meaningful connections between them so that you are actually creating new knowledge? And I think that is always going to be a human endeavor as opposed to something that can always be done on a on a computer.
I think we have time for one more question right here in the center.
Sure, thanks. So this isn't totally a question. I just wanted to offer my perspective because I too am a student. I'm a sophomore here at University Park, and I'm actually a registered attendee for this event. So that just gives you some perspective on where I come from. And I have to agree with my fellow student in that I have never found, well, not never, but technology in a classroom, at least the way it's currently being used, throughout Penn State, throughout probably a lot of places in America, has not made an impactful difference. My favorite class right now is, it's a class examining just race, and it uses a PowerPoint, and that's pretty much it. And one of my, I guess two more things. So one of my biggest issues with, things that make learning, the education system kind of difficult is a lot of the time I'm just forced to sort of learn things and sit through things that I'm simply not interested in. And that's even in my major, right, which has all the things I'll need for success or whatever. And then the other thing that you all said, I think you mentioned it, you were talking about, trying to get feedback from the students and what do they want to see in a class. And I actually was fortunate enough this semester, or rather last semester, to design a class that is now being taught this semester. So I'm TAing for that class with the Associate Dean of the Honors College here. And the first thing we did was I told her that we should make a survey and send it out to the students of the class and say, look, what do you want to see in this class, right? This class is for you. We're the teachers, but what do you want to see? What do you want to see in this class? What do you want to get from it? And so we've been doing our best to stick to that. But I feel like that was the biggest thing I wanted out of the class. I wanted the students to feel like they got something out of it, not just, look, I'm teaching a class. So I just thought you might appreciate that input and perspective.
So by way of, to build on that insight and kind of lead into some brief closing thoughts, what are those opportunities around student engagement, around kind of beginning to think about how do we, make it more relevant to the student or more interesting or also approach motivation in a very effective way? What thoughts or ideas do you have in that space as well?
Well, I think really just trying to include students in things that you might not necessarily think of. So, for instance, we have student representatives on our Learning Spaces committee. We're redoing an entire floor of classrooms, and we wanted to know sort of from the students, what is it that they need? And they're even test driving the furniture choices, or the prospective furniture choices, and they're telling us how they actually study, what they want to use the rooms for, after 5 o'clock when they might want to, do work with their clubs or, other organizations. And again, having them be in the room for things like discussions on our new general education curriculum, where we're changing our core curriculum up, and having them sort of be there and represent from their perspective. And that is a new thing for a lot of our faculty. I would say especially a lot of our older faculty feel that it's the student's job to sort of show up and be gifted with the knowledge from the faculty member. And I think that perspective is one that is changing, and I think we're trying to undertake a bit of a culture change of saying that sometimes our students really know what it is that they need and what's going to prepare them best, because often our faculty don't even know what courses comprise one of the majors. They don't know what the students take after their class. So if they're not hearing this from the students, it's not clear who they're going to hear it from.
And while I agree completely with that, I do think that there is a balance to be struck with being completely student-driven, because the faculty are the experts, and there is a sequence and knowledge scaffolds and builds on top of other things. And if it was completely student-driven, I have a 14-year-old son, and believe me, he would not choose to study many of the things he's studying right now in high school, but he needs to study those. And he doesn't see the bigger picture right now, and I think many of our undergraduates perhaps are in a similar boat. We're at a very interesting point at UCF. We're about to, hopefully, if we get legislative funding, build a downtown campus. And it's sort of the opportunity that rarely comes along to say, if you could build a university from scratch, what would it be? So we're going through this blue sky exercise right now that I'm sure will crash down to reality soon enough. But right now it's all, unicorns and cupcakes about what are we going to build downtown. And it's very exciting. If you want to do an eye chart, go to our website for the downtown campus and look at the org chart. It's ridiculous. and I'm on 3 different committees looking at these things. But I actually think there's probably not enough student engagement in that process. Now, students are part of it, and there's open forums and things, but asking them, what do they want to be, what do they want in this downtown campus where students will live? They'll be co-located with students from another institution, from Valencia College, which is our biggest state/community college feeder school, where we're looking at combining living and studying environments where there is no clear separation necessarily, where, for example, the School of Visual Arts and Design is planning to go downtown, and they're talking about, for students who are majoring in art, having their dorm rooms face north for better light, which is kind of an interesting consideration of what the student needs might be in a particular discipline. And building spaces where interdisciplinary collisions are intended to happen, building collaborative workspaces in the dorms. And I think all of those things are sort of student-centric as we go forward, and I hope we do more of them, and I hope that all of these things survive the planning process.
Well, I would agree with Tom, and in fact, it seems like it's tough to come right after you because a lot of our thoughts are the same. I think it's a balance where we balance student relevance with intellectual honesty. So we get courses that, in fact, are what they say they're going to be, but at the same time are relevant to students and their experiences. And that means we have to be open to that. We have to ask those questions, because oftentimes we just need a space to ask, what do you think? What would you find interesting? And then we go ahead and we maneuver and construct a course that makes sense, but also is relevant to students. And then we expand that to spaces where we talk to students about what kinds of things work for you. We're building new dorms and living learning communities along the same line and saying, well, how do we do this? Like, one floor is all glass. You can see almost from one end to the other. And so it's a very public space. And there's offices and there's places for students to meet and things like that, because they're trying to build a sense of students talking to each other and working with each other instead of coming in and living in a box. So I think there's a balance to be had there. We have something to add to the equation, and students have something to add to the equation, and I think we can build more effective environments that way.
Fantastic. Please join me in thanking our panel for their time today. So this concludes this year's conference. I want to thank everyone for coming, to our presenters, for preparing to present today, to our Open Innovation Challengers, for having the courage to kind of take on something new, and to all of our attendees, and especially those who have come to us from across Pennsylvania. Thank you for making that trip. And we look forward to your feedback and kind of moving forward. So again, thank you very much for your time, and safe travels to everyone.
Thank you.